Ni hao, this is Lou Reinisch, and I'm going to talk to you today about my experiences as an entrepreneur, what it was like for me to actually start up a company. And this experience that I'm going to share with you is an actual true story, and there are 10 lessons that I learned along the way of becoming an entrepreneur. And I'm going to share these with you. I'm going to be very open and very honest with you, explaining to you the mistakes I made and helping that you will not make the same mistakes. My experiences are from about 10 years ago when I was living in New Zealand, and on all of the slides I put in the subtitles in Mandarin. My humble apologies. If there's mistakes in these subtitles, I hope that you can accept them, and I hope that they help you to follow through on my talk. The problem that we tried to solve 10 years ago was when somebody opens a letter and a white powder spills out of that letter. There was a good chance that that white powder could be anthrax, which of course is a deadly bacteria. And if the white powder that spills out of the letter is anthrax, what do you do? Do you have to close the building? Do you have everybody go through emergency showers to wash the bacteria off of them? Does everybody start taking medication for the bacteria? Well, it would be very nice if you knew instantly if this white powder was anthrax, or if it were something much simpler, such as flour or sugar or any other sort of white powder. We developed a machine, and this is the proof of concept of the machine. This is our very first prototype, that this machine could measure white powders and determine in just a few minutes with no chemical reagents if that white powder was anthrax or not. And it was simply as easy as putting it on top of the white powder. You push the button, you wait 3 minutes, and it tells you the results. This was a fantastic finding that we had in the laboratory, and we wanted to take this idea and commercialize it. So my first thought was, I have to tell the agency that's funding this research about this finding, so that they can take it and they can commercialize it and actually sell the product. And as it turned out, the agency was having a quarterly meeting of progress in the next 2 weeks after the discovery. So I just simply had 2 weeks to get data all together, get everything combined to be able to tell the funding agency about it, and then they could take over. Of course, I was really excited about the results, and so I decided that I also would tell a collaborator, somebody that I had worked with for 15 years. Now, the collaborator I happened to talk to, I will call him BB, because BB worked for the U.S. Department of Defense and had done similar sorts of work in his career. And he promises to me that I could get really good funding from the government if I send him the data. So I sent him all of the data that I had, explaining how this technique works and what was unique about it. Now, remember, I had this number one step was to inform the funding agency. And I went to the quarterly meetings and I told them about it, and nothing happened. I telephoned them, I sent them additional emails over the next 2 months, and still absolutely nothing happens. And of course I'm getting anxious because I want this device to be made and to be sold. So I go back to the collaborator. And remember, he works for the Department of Defense, and he promises me more funding if I can give him the data, which I did. Well, then he comes back to me and says that we should publish the data, and of course he would be a co-author on the paper. Now, this collaborator did nothing to contribute towards this research. So why he would be a co-author is beyond me. But I told him I didn't want to publish. I wanted to be able to get a patent. And if you publish the data, you make it public domain and you can't get a patent anymore. So I said, no, we're not patenting it. Frustrated that the company that I sold this idea to or told them about did nothing about it, I went and I talked to the technology transfer office at the university. And I went to them and I said, this idea is such a great idea and it seems to be just dying. Nobody's doing anything about it. And I thought maybe the technology transfer office could help me to get a patent on this idea. Well, the technology transfer office told me that they have an agreement with the funding agency, and the technology transfer office owns this intellectual property. It doesn't belong to the funding agency. It belongs to the university, to the technology transfer office. So I was actually telling the wrong people about this idea. So my number one rule is know who owns the intellectual property before you do anything. Be sure of who that owner is, because you could make a terrible mistake. And I was so lucky that the company did nothing with it, because now the technology transfer office could create the company and were free to do that. So the first step of creating the company is to determine who the inventors are for the patent. Now, when you create a patent, the co-inventors are partners for life. This is a very serious collaboration, and patent law defines very carefully who the inventors are. And you have to make sure that when you're filing the patent that you put down the correct inventors. And being a co-inventor is not a reward that you give to somebody. It's something that you earn because of your contributions to this. When I talked to the patent attorney, they asked me if my students had come up with this idea or were the students simply doing the work that I told them to do. And I said, for this particular experiment, they were doing the work that I told them to do. And the patent attorney told me, then they are not co-inventors. Of course, the students were upset when they weren't co-inventors. And one student, who I will call the special student, SS, he appeals the decision. And he appeals the decision to the university. So the university decides that there should be a committee of academics, a committee of professors, to hear this appeal. They asked me if the special student would be a co-author on the paper, and I said yes. So they said, well, then he should be a co-inventor. Now, this is not what patent law says. This is what academics say. And the academics in this case overturned the decision and overturned it in a bad way. And not only did it affect the patent, but it also affected the student, because this special student, after he was a co-inventor, he stops all of his experimental work in the lab, and he spent over $500 on internet charges by spending his time on the internet, and then he failed his PhD oral exam. So he was completely out of the loop of what was happening. And when we looked back to see what was he doing on the internet for all of this time, we saw that he had been visiting various sites like BMW, Forbes, Yacht World, eLuxury, Prada, all of these high-end companies where he was already going to spend all the money that he anticipated that he would get from this patent, although at the time he had gotten absolutely no money from the patent. So my rule number 2 is appreciate the difference between the business world and the academic world. They are two different worlds, They have two different sets of rules, and they both follow those different sets of rules. Now, remember, I talked to the patent attorney. Next step was to talk to the patent attorneys. And this is to talk about the patent. Now, I've in my career have come across many different patent attorneys, and there are basically two types of patent attorneys. There are some that look for what can be patented, and there's the others that look for reasons why you cannot patent something. I always say, look for the patent attorney that's going to be looking for what can be patented, because that's a very, very clever art. So I got to talk with a very good patent attorney. We wrote up the patent. It was a wonderful document. Now, remember going back to the collaborator that I talked to, BB, that he works for the Department of Defense, and he promised me funding if I sent them the data, but then he wanted to publish the data, and I said no. Well, then BB actually claims that he is not only an inventor of the idea, but he is the inventor of the idea, and I had stolen the idea from him. Now, this required several weeks of working with people, digging through hundreds of emails, making timelines of what happened, who did what data, where the data was at, where it was handed off, before somebody could finally say that BB was not the inventor of the data. So now I had the patent, and I had the opportunity to talk to possible investors about investing in this company. And the funding agency, they don't own the technology, but they have the first right of refusal. They could come in and say they wanted to be, part of the company. And so we asked them if they wanted to contribute some money into the company and become part of the company. And they didn't want to contribute any money into the company, but they said that my research funding would continue for 3 more years. Well, I didn't want money for research funding for 3 years. I wanted money to start up a company. And so I rejected that and said, no, we need money, we need cash to get a company started. When I rejected their offer, they instantly cut my funding. They owed me 6 months of funding, which they never ever paid me, and I just went on losing that 6 months of funding, which was several $100,000. So we were then talking, and this is where you make your pitch. You make your pitch on your product to different groups. And I got to make it to many different groups. Finally, 2 different groups, Endeavor ICAP and Naitahu, both of these agreed to invest $1.6 million into the company. But the first thing that they have to do is they have to do their due diligence. They have to research the company, they have to research the findings, make sure it's valid, make sure that there's really a market for the company, and that that the idea can actually make money. So they started to examine the market. They started to look to ask people, if there was a device like this, would you buy it? What would you pay for it? Is there another device out that does the same thing as this device does? Now, remember my collaborator, my good friend BB, that he works for the Department of Defense, and he promised me funding if I sent him the data, which I did. Then he wants to publish. Then he claimed that he was the inventor. And after we approved that he wasn't the inventor, and I'm talking to companies about investing and creating a company, a startup company, BB then has the audacity to publish the data without including my name on the paper. So on the internet, we saw the whole idea out in the open. Of course, we instantly contacted the journal that published it and told them that this was information that didn't belong to Bert Bronk, that didn't belong to BB, and they had to take it down. But in talking to the patent attorney about this, what happened, because this was up on the internet for 3 days, the patent attorney says that all coverage of patents in Europe is no longer possible. We could only get coverage for the idea in the United States, but we could not get it in Europe. Now, recall, I'm talking to investors, and that's when this came out, and we lost patent coverage for Europe. Well, to the investors, that looked like they just put money into this company, and then all of a sudden that money went up in flames. This is my third rule, and a very important rule, is know how to use a non-disclosure agreement. If I would have had BB sign a non-disclosure agreement and it said I was sending him the data and he couldn't disclose it, then he could not have claimed it was his idea, and we could have legally gone after him for publishing that data. Well, at this point, things I think are done for me. There was a company created, the patents written, they had patent coverage in the United States, got investments for a company to start up, and my job was done. I could go back to my lab, go back to my research, and let the company go ahead. Because I'd given them a prototype device of what this device would be like. Well, there's something here I learned that's very important, and that is the inventor is critically important to the company, especially a startup company. And if you want to know how important the inventor is, this was June 2006. We had started the company. We had the big kickoff, the big gala event. It was great. We had very clear direction. They had a prototype device. They simply had to make it into a device that you could use and carry into a building. 6 months later, in December of 2006, I sat in on one of the meetings. And the venture capital firms claimed at that meeting that they were misled. And they started talking about minimizing the losses. In other words, pulling out, taking whatever money's left and walking away. Now, this is a picture of Garth Carnaby. Garth is a New Zealander who's a physicist and has invented many different things and has been involved in the wool industry with his inventions. He told me from the very beginning that as the inventor, you're going to be necessary, that the company will claim that the idea doesn't work because they don't have the knowledge to get it to work. And he was absolutely right. You do have to stay with the company. You have to stay on top of it. So this is my fourth rule of entrepreneurship. If you're not ready to give up your day job and join the startup company and devote yourself fully to the startup company, you might as well just publish the findings and don't worry about starting a company, because that company is not going to succeed unless you're willing to give it your 110%. So now I was reacting, not being proactive, but being reactive. And I joined the company as a consultant, which they allowed me to do. I requested a position on the board of directors. They wouldn't allow me on the board of directors. Now, to me, this was important. So why is a board position so important to me? Well, in the United States, it's very common for the inventor to be a member of the board of directors. And the inventor being a member of the board of directors is not so common in New Zealand. But as most startup companies go, there is no CEO. And so the company is being run by the board of directors. The board of directors is not just doing the governance, but they're actually managing the company. And I felt that I wanted to be part of that management and not just have a sideline role of working in the company, but to be much more in directing how the company is going. And so to me, being on the board was important. But when they say no, what can you do? Well, what recourse you have is you can do what we call in the States, you can vote with your feet. You can walk away. And that's what I told them. I told them if I couldn't have a board position, I was walking away from the company. I was leaving, and that I had no interest in the company. And this is why it's so important to have the inventor, is that if you look at the anatomy of an entrepreneur has to have three components. They have to have a knowledge, a really good understanding of the company and the idea that the company is going to make. They have to have a passion in their heart that they want to see this succeed. And they have to have a fire in their belly, a fire in their stomach that's saying that they're going to make this happen. And this is the necessary engine for any startup company. So this was my rule number 5. Always be ready to exert yourself. Let people know that you have an idea and how you want that idea to go forward, and push it through, because that's absolutely essential. So I did get a position on the board, and of course one of the first things the board does is it hires a CEO, a Chief Executive Officer. Now, here I have a very short clip from Jerry Kaplan. Jerry Kaplan is one of the early persons in the internet to create the first online auction company. And he's speaking at Stanford University about the 5 biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make. And I've clipped out here just one mistake, and it's mistake number 4. So let's listen to what Jerry has to say. And there are subtitles that are in Chinese.
Is fourth mistake that I've seen people make is that they hire people that they like rather than people that they need. Now, many companies have started right here at Stanford by people who are graduating from whatever program they're in, and they have some friends that they really like and say, let's go start a company so we can stay together, so we can work together. We've had a great time this past few years. We want to continue to do it. I got news for you. A company and a venture is not a social club. And the problem is that if you hire only people you like, you will not be hiring the critical skills that are needed to build a venture. And you will tend to hire people who are like you and bring to the table different skills and different points of view, which are so critical to being able to integrate into the activity that you're involved in. One of my greatest accomplishments, I think, over the past, it's getting to be a long time, 20 years or so since I've sat in this audience. The building wasn't here, but I sat there anyway. I have worked with people that I truly detest and have done so successfully for long periods of time, and it's been great. You have to learn to respect people that you don't like. I think that's the key message.
Okay, and what Jerry tells us is you hire the best person for the job, not necessarily the best friend that you have. And now it's hard and expensive to find a chief executive officer, and it's, as I said, up to the board of directors to hire the chief executive officer. And we made what I now say is a mistake, that we had Andrew Rudge. He was working with the company through the tech transfer office. He was helping to get things started on the company. And when we needed a CEO, we looked to Andrew Rudge, and he was a smart personable person. He had a PhD in mechanical engineering, but he had no experience running a company. He had no management skills, and he had absolutely no fundraising skills. Two really big negatives. And we hired him to be the CEO because he was personable. He was nice. It's not the reason to hire somebody. We needed somebody with management skills. We needed somebody who could raise funds. We needed somebody who could drive the bus and not just sit on the bus and take it for a ride. And that wasn't what we had. So that was my rule number 6, is do the hard work to hire the best person for each position in the company. Don't just hire somebody because they're available. Now, we did get to start this company, and starting a company is fantastic. It is a tremendous amount of fun. You go through designing what your logo is, what your company name is, prototyping the device, all of these ideas of how you're going to sell the device, how you're going to market the device, and it's just a tremendous amount of fun to do this. And to me, one of the best things I've ever done. Now, we worked with the company, and as I came in as a consultant, we got the technical side sorted. I started having weekly group meetings that were several hours long, and we started to do more work in-house and less contract work outside of the company, and we developed a very good respect for each other. Now, when you're working here, every day is costing you, and this is every single day of the week, is costing you $3,000. Because that's how much money you're spending on salaries, on rent, on everything that you have to have done. And so every day you lose is $3,000 of money. And there are deadlines that have to be met, and there are unknowns. And not only are there unknowns, but there are unknown things that you don't know. And here I have a very, very short clip from Vinod Koshlin. Vinod is speaking at Stanford, and he is an entrepreneur, and he's talking about what people don't know. Now, this goes by quickly, and again, there are subtitles, but just be prepared.
Time where most entrepreneurs fail is on the things they don't know they don't know. It's not what they don't know, it's what they don't know they don't know.
So it's what you don't know that you don't know. And that came up so often. We discovered that not only does the fluorescence from anthrax have a particular characteristics, but many other substances, in particular glycated proteins, and there's lots of glycated proteins in the world, have that same pattern. And many of the hoax substances contain glycated proteins. So we had to improve our data collection and be much more specific to actually separate out those anthrax from hoax substances. We also had technical problems that the temperature inside this device, because the device couldn't have any openings in it because it needed to be able to sterilize it. And so you couldn't have a fan because that would blow the anthrax all around. And so there were lamps inside this that we had to cool, but we couldn't use a fan. And we had to work on how to do that, and we actually ended up pumping the heat into the batteries. And then you would take out the heat when you changed the batteries in the device. We also found out that papers have dyes in them to make them look whiter. And washing powder for your clothes has dyes to make them look whiter. Which means that if the white powder spilled onto a piece of paper, that piece of paper would blind our detector because it was so bright in its fluorescence. And I was sitting at a board meeting and I was trying to explain this problem to the other members of the board, and it suddenly struck me. I said, we just need something that we can rub on the table. We can then pick up the spores, we can turn it over and put it underneath the device. And indeed, that's what we ended up doing. And here I have a really short clip. There's no sound to it, but just showing how the device works and how you pick up the spores. And this was the device that we were actually selling. You'd pick up them on this slight device, turn it over, put it down, put our seeker on top, push the button, and in 3 minutes it would say whether there was any spores on there or not. And this says no spores appeared. So it could detect that hoax substance. We also had problems because we used bleach to contaminate it, and there were cracks and crevices in the device, and if the bleach stayed in it, it would actually change our samples. And so we had to redesign it so that there was no cracks and crevices in the casing of the device. So all of these things were coming, but we did get a device built, and one that was very successful. We sent it out to independent labs, and we had a test over 70 different things, and it could identify the anthrax 100% of the time. And only one time in one test did it say that a hoax substance was anthrax. So it was incredibly sensitive and worked extremely well. But now, as the company is always running out of money, right? This is an ongoing problem, that we're always running out of money, and we always need to have more. And always the investors come to the rescue, but they always take a large percentage of the equity when they do this. So my word to you, my word of advice, is that the guy with the money controls the show. So when you're doing your pitch to investors, and they're actually looking at you and deciding if they want to invest in you, you should be looking at them and deciding if you want them to invest in your company. You should do due diligence on them. How many startups have they funded? How successful have they been? If they haven't been successful, it's probably because they are actually part of the problem that these startups have had. And indeed, I would have not, knowing what I know now, I would not have accepted the money from the investors that we did. So don't be afraid to walk away from the money. That's easier said than done. But if the money's not going to help you, if the money comes attached with strings that are going to keep you from being successful, it's not worth having. And so this is my rule number 7. If the idea is really worthwhile, there are plenty of investors. Choose one carefully. Don't take the first one that comes along. So we had our device. We called our device the Scout, but we were told by another company that they used the name for one of their devices. Their device did something completely different. It was a chemical detector, but they said we would copyright, we were infringing on their trademark, and so we didn't have money to fight them in court, so we changed the name from Scout to Seeker, and this was our spore detector that we ended up sold. So my number 8 rule is always have an alternate strategy. Always be thinking about what happens if this doesn't work. What else am I going to do? And me, I'm a professor. And a professor is those who can do, those who can't teach. And if I can't start up the company, I will teach entrepreneurship. And so I developed courses of science entrepreneurship. I developed these courses in New Zealand. I've taken and made these courses work for the United States, and most recently I've changed them and evolved them to work in China, where we talk about entrepreneurship and what's involved in that. And remember, the anatomy of the entrepreneur, the knowledge, the passion in the heart, the fire in the belly. And the question is, can entrepreneurs be made? And I think they can be. And that's the whole purpose of the course, is to help make better entrepreneurs. Now, my number 9 rule is it's not all fun and games. There are times that you have to work really hard. There are times when things seem to be going great. Then there are times when there seems that nothing is working right and nothing is going great. And as you go along, you go from these very high highs to these very low lows. And you go up and down and up and down. And the only nice thing is that over time, they tend to damp out. They tend to go away, and you tend to start to slide along. But you do have to say, when I'm down at that low part of the valley, when I'm at my lowest low, that I just have to keep going. I just have to keep working, because it is going to get better, and it does get better. So, why teach entrepreneurship? Well, I have a short clip here from Sue Suckling. She was chair of the governance committee in New Zealand. She started out as a lecturer at Lincoln University and was Businesswoman of the Year in New Zealand in 1985. And I think I really like this very short clip from Sue when she talks about what is the important message to give to people starting up companies, to give to anybody in business.
I was given an opportunity, which all of us at various times in our careers are given opportunities. And as an aside, my maxim is, when the door opens, your job is to put your foot through it. My door opened when I was working with a meat company, and a German value-add processor of meat products came to look for a New Zealand partner. And they met me and they liked me. They actually chose to go with another meat company, but they said, we want that woman that we met over at this other place to come and work for us.
Big compliment.
Big compliment. And that was an exciting time, but it also led to an opportunity to be nominated as Businesswoman of the Year for that work, and of which I became New Zealand's inaugural Businesswoman of the Year. Yeah. With that created an opportunity for the then Minister of Trade to put me on the Trade Development Board as someone from the meat industry, but not one of the traditionalists from the meat industry. That was a door opening.
I don't mean...
And so, Sue's maxim, her motto is, when the door opens, you have to step through it. And this is where I come up with my final rule. It's seize the opportunity. When an opportunity is available to you, grab that opportunity, because it will only allow you to have more opportunities. So, your mission after taking this course in entrepreneurship is to go beyond what others have done, to create what no one else has thought of before, to build what has not been built before, and for heaven's sakes, do not maintain the status quo. I want you to be able to move beyond. And through the course, we work with coming up with ideas, with being creative, with marketing those ideas, and doing what others haven't thought of. And I have another very short clip here from Tom Peters, who's the author of several books on business management. And he talks a little bit here about benchmarking.
It's not the main topic of my speech, but I hate benchmarking. Benchmarking is stupid. Why is it stupid? Because we pick the current industry leader, and then we launch a 5-year program, the goal of which is to be as good as whoever was best 5 years ago, 5 years from now. Which to me is not exactly an Olympian aspiration. As two professors said in the Financial Times article a while back, to grow, companies need to break out of a vicious cycle of competitive benchmarking and imitation.
Yes, you need to break out of benchmarking and trying to be as good as somebody else. Create your own destiny, your own way to go forward. And so I want you to create the benchmark, not to measure it. Entrepreneurship is exciting, it's fun. Entrepreneurship is also very uncertain, and that's part of the excitement. If you're going to do it, learn from others, get a mentor, somebody that you can talk to, somebody that you can help. And remember that no matter what you do, there is no failure in entrepreneurship. You may decide to give up an idea and move to a different idea, but that's not a failure. That's simply deciding to move to a different idea. And so I have one final clip, and I thank you so very much for listening. I hope to be talking to you all again soon, that we can really share in entrepreneurship.
Some believe that moving to New York City and chasing your dreams is a fool's errand. But for some, not taking that gamble is way more risky than playing it safe. That's the mindset of an entrepreneur. But what makes an entrepreneur successful? Going to a highly ranked global university with an incubator program is a good start. Being taught by faculty with industry connections is a major plus. And that late-night supply of energy drinks can be clutch. But making it as an entrepreneur comes down to one thing: putting in work. The kind of work that gets you noticed and lands you support from Microsoft to work on their most promising invention ever, HoloLens. Major organizations are already using HoloLens to explore the surface of Mars, to build safer vehicles, and to change the way we collaborate with colleagues around the globe. By exploring this new frontier, we are moving beyond our two-dimensional interaction with technology. In this dimension, we play, explore, reimagine, re-engineer, and make some new friends along the way. We are the ones who question the fiction in science fiction. And the future is ours.